Thank you all so much for letting me share interest in the pursuit of amateur radio and the pursuit of small unmanned aerial systems. We're going to mash those up tonight. Now, the first question you guys are thinking is, Don, why would anybody who's into amateur radio care about small unmanned aerial systems? And the answer is there is so much overlap between these two hobbies you wouldn't believe it. First overlap. How many of you guys know how to use a soldering iron? Yo, baby! Guess how many soldering irons you have to know to use a drone? A bunch. It's the same thing. Is our ham radio hobby, is it licensed and regulated? You gotta have a license, right? Okay. To fly commercially, you gotta have a license. Who does it on the ground side? Who does the radio side? FCC. Who does it when you're in the air? FAA, right. Who does it when you combine the two of them? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's a gray area. Here's what we're going to do tonight. I'm gonna do show and tell for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to our real guest speaker, Dr. Christopher Vo, who I will introduce formally in a minute, but we're thrilled to have him. He's going to talk on the policy, regulations, controls, all the stuff that I don't know. I can make it up, but he knows what's going on. So Christopher is going to talk about the real stuff. And then the last part of it is going to be, we're going to fly some drones. And we are going to do in the last part of this what will undoubtedly be subsequently thought of as ill-advised and dangerous. The sort of thing that is typically preceded by, Mom, look at this, and what could go wrong. All right, so I need to get stuff going. You guys are going to be very, very busy because there's going to be a lot of hands-on stuff. So I got a lot of stuff I want to pass around. The reason why we're going to do that is a lot of us learn better by touching and feeling. So I'm going to start the pass-around process, and you guys get to fondle things and move them. Pretend you're Harvey Weinstein. Just kidding. Okay. All right, so a couple of things. First, we're going to pass around. Here's a carbon fiber frame. I want you to play with this. You can drop it. You can throw it. You're not going to break it. Well, don't throw it that hard. But this is what makes a lot of the hobby possible. Incredibly lightweight and incredibly durable. So I want you guys to take these, play with them, pass them around at the end of the table, go back, and then let it end up in the back of the room. So that's what it starts with. It starts with a frame. Now, you gotta have a receiver. This is a receiver that's on the drone. This is a current state-of-the-art receivers. This little bad boy is the size of a postage stamp. It uses frequency hopping spread spectrum in a form of CDMA to accomplish some magic. 16 channels of reception, at least a dense telemetry stream going back. And it's got two little antennas. These are what? End-fed dipoles, right? Either 5/8 or 1/4 inch. This works on 2.4 gigahertz. The telemetry that this guy transmits includes your voltage, that's nice to know before you fall out of the sky, the voltage inside on your boards, your XYZ coordinates, that's nice to know, altimeter, your height, that's nice to know, and a bunch of other good stuff, and it all does it on one line. So that's why I got these 3 wires here. So take a look at the modern state-of-the-art of receivers. This is airborne. Oh, by the way, the frequency hopping on that, who do we owe thanks to for frequency hopping? Hedy Lamarr. Anybody? Okay, 2 things about Hedy Lamarr. What was her first name? Her real first name? Kedwick. Now you know why she was called Hedley. Something else, second fact about Hedy Lamarr. What did she do in 1933 that set the groundwork for all following cinema? No, don't worry. We could. Yeah, my wife, if she was here, would be cringing too. There she is. Oh, that's my wife over there, Bonnie. Thank you for coming. No, Hedy Lamarr was filmed achieving, shall we say, a moment of transcendent bliss. And she did that on film, and that was the first time that had ever been recorded. So not only is she a mathematician and scientist that we owe frequency hopping to, she also had some other firsts. Go Hedy. Let's see. So what does that little postage stamp receiver transmitter do? It talks to the flight controller. What's a flight controller do? A ton of friggin' math. It takes all the signals from that receiver and translates into, am I supposed to go forwards, backwards, left, right? Am I using my energy wisely? Do I need to turn on my beeper? Do I need to control my transmitter? This is it. This is the flight controller. So it's, and I put it on a little hinge here. And it's on a hinge because on the back, you'll see a port for an SD card. That is your black box recorder. Everything about your flight gets recorded on that SD card. So if you want to replay it, you can. Okay. What does a flight controller talk to? It's got to talk to the motors. How does it do that? This is what controls your motors. On here, there's a little card. It controls a bunch of MOSFETs. Very high speed, and they talk to the motors. Now, you're thinking, Don, what is all this other weird stuff around the card here? Well, if you fly the way I do, your motors meet violent and unplanned ends. So, these are just motor graveyard parts that I found amusing. So that's the speed controllers and some of the motors. Okay, so if you want to see in the air, how are you going to do it? Everything you've been looking at is 2.4 gigs. For the video, we move up to 5.8 gigs. So the penetration isn't as good, but the data bandwidth is obviously better. This is a very standard hobby drone camera. This is actually what all the kids fly when they're racing. If you watch racing on the web, if you look at FPV videos, this is what they're flying right here. This is 200 milliwatts on the transmitter. This is a very interesting antenna. So we as amateur radio people, we're really big in antennas. Why? Why do ham radio operators care so much about antennas? Because they're right, transmitter efficiency. Anything else? Yeah, right. If you can't get a radiation, all your hi-fi is not very good, right? The same thing is true for pilots and drone operators. You got to have an antenna. There is an intense amount of research and effort and creativity on drone antennas because you don't want to carry a lot of weight. You don't have a lot of watts up there, so you make up for it with antennas. And here we have the little progression of antenna research. We start off with a little rubber ducky, which is another end-fed dipole. That progressed to this brilliant innovation of, a little hard to see, but inside here there's 4 lobes of a circularly polarized magic, 2.4 gigs. That turned into doing the same thing here at 5.8 gigs. Why is 2.4 smaller than 5.8? Right, exactly. One bigger wavelength, longer wavelength, bigger antenna. Okay. And then this one, this was a bit of genius here. This is a copper-clad printed circuit card that has etched a certain pattern on it. And it has a little small radiator on the bottom. You combine this, you have a perfect circularly polarized field. This little bad boy is cheap to make, robust, and brilliant. Brand new. A year ago, this thing didn't exist, and now they're everywhere. And you guys know what these things are? Squares. Yeah, squares. Right. These are panel arrays, highly directional, incredible gain. This guy will get you about 9 dB forward gain. This guy, an incredible 16 dB of forward gain. This thing is a lightsaber going forward. Let's see if it works. Oh man, this is incredible. You guys should hear the voices I'm picking up. Incredible! Actually, that's not true at all. I don't need an antenna to hear voices. My voice is coming great anyway. All right, so there's a group of antennas. Just as important to ham radio people as they are to drone pilots. Yeah, they want to be free. They want to fly. These things are meant to fly there. You can just push them in better. Okay. So you see the parallels between operating ham radio gear and operating drones? There's so much overlap. You people now, you exquisitely talented, brilliant folks that know how to do all your HF and your satellite comms, you are 90% of your way to being thoroughly qualified drone pilots. Who has tried to fly a drone here? All right. Was it easy? Were you successful your first time? Right. I wanted one person to say yes because I'd say you're a liar. Mm-hmm.
Radio.
Exactly. Okay, I'll give all of you all a quick drone flying lesson. Hold up your left hand. That's that one over there, your left hand. When you push your thumb forward, your propeller goes fast. When you push your thumb backwards, propeller goes slow. When you push your thumb to the left, you're going to pirouette left. When you push your thumb to the right, you're going to pirouette right. All right, that thumb's good to go. Now take your drinking thumb. When you put your drinking thumb up, when you push it forward, you're going to lean forward. When you pull your right thumb back, you're going to lean back. Go to the right, ooh. Go to the left, ooh. Now hold both your thumbs up. You're qualified. Okay, last thing, talk about, now this is the similarities between drones and radio. When you take your Go kit, and you're out in the field up on the mountain and you're doing your DX from the mountaintop, what is the one constraint you have? Say it again. Say it again. That's exactly. It's all about your battery capacity. Guess what you're worried about when you're in the air? Power. It's all the same thing. We are constrained by the amount of energy we can take with us when we go out with our Go kits. We're constrained by the amount of energy we can take up with us when we fly. Battery management is huge. So we all move towards using these very high density batteries. This is a little bag that best practices says you're supposed to recharge your lithium ion batteries in here. You know what this is made out of? Heat resistant Kelvar. Because if your battery starts to cook off, your lithium ion battery cooks off, you can get a real sparky, exciting event. Now, when mine goes off, I'm not stopping to zip it up, so I'm not sure what the zipper is about. But, okay. Now, uses for drones. We've already talked a little bit about the antenna thing. Let me share with you my experiences on the antenna. I thought it would be very cool to be able to take a monofilament up and drop it on the other side of the tree. What I didn't realize was getting up was easy, but getting down was hard. Because as soon as I came down, my drone got caught in the monofilament. And then I had to depend upon gravity. I said, well, okay, let's take this thing and turn it into an asset. I now know how to find the end of the monofilament. So, but then I started to work and said, I got to do better. I got to be able to drop a weight. The weight has to be attached to the monofilament, and then I will do my mission and have my dignity at the same time. So tonight, in the third phase of our program, we are going to watch Don meet certain disaster as he tries a never-before event to take this little drone hooked up to a survey, hooked up to a channel, hooked up to my controller, and this weight, which we are going to tie to a monofilament, we're going to fly it over a few tables as if they were an enormous tree, and we're going to drop this on the other side and see what happens. So that we'll do that at the end. Let's see, the last thing I want to chat about before we move on to Dr. Vo. Dr. Vo, two things. One is we get licenses to be to be ham radio operators. If you want to fly commercially, you can also get certified. Dr. Vo is one of the leading authorities on small aerial unmanned systems operations. I also got my small remote pilot certificate, and I did that because I knew I wanted to fly. And I knew I wanted to learn all that I could about it. I got my small pilot certification for exactly the same reason that I got my ham radio licenses. I thought I knew, that if I had my ham radio certification, I could do a better job of flying drones. Now, this is a very big gray area, but But think of it this way. Why would a drone operator care about having a ham license? What possibly would be the motivation? Follow this logic. Who is authorized to use transmitters that are not FCC Part 15 qualified? Everyone in this room. Technician, general, Swami advanced superclass. The only people that can operate those non-Part 15 certified transmitters are you people in this room. Now, there hasn't been a single piece of gear, none of the stuff you're seeing tonight, none of the stuff I see flying, none of the stuff you see on the web, that is Part 15 qualified. Therefore, who is the only one that can legally operate transmitters in the air? You. That's why ham radio operators should be interested in drone stuff and vice versa. So that's the deal. Okay, last couple things, quick pass around. This is your typical starter drone right here. This is how most people start in the hobby. It's called a QAV 250 clone. There you go, pass it around. You can see it shows a lot of my learning. There's a middle drone that is in the woods that I haven't found it yet. This is the third one. You'll see it looks much more elegant. It's more compact. The wiring's neater. So there's a progression. And the last thing I want to pass around is this is a little camera of a VWS camera of life. So I'm going to hook it on. And with any luck, it's going to start, if I can see right, it's going to start transmitting on the 5.8 gigahertz spectrum. And this little bad boy here is going to receive it. And I just want you guys to have a little fun. Take this thing, point it around, and you will see what drone pilots see. That's what you're getting. And then if anybody's very daring, I challenge any one of you, put this bad boy on and walk around with this in front of you and just try to navigate between your friends. Just tell us when you do it, because we're all getting our cameras out. So there you go. Okay. Let's see. So that is about it. Any other questions for me before we move on to the experts?
It measures barometric pressure.
Yes.
It has 3 axes accelerometers.
Yeah, and that's a gyroscope that measures all 3 axes. Yeah. Yeah.
We live in restricted airspace. So how does that play into what you're able to do? I mean, is there a threshold?
That's a great question. What's legal and what isn't? I'm going to save those for Chris. He's going to handle all those questions about what you can and can't do.
Are you aware of any commercially available micro repeaters deployed on any of the drones? Commercially available, that is the key.
No, but I frequently thought of take one of these bad boys, put them on dual band trans pass-through mode, and now you have a repeater up at 400 feet. Would that be cool? Has anybody used those little Altoid tin-based whisper net little transmitter things? Imagine putting that up at 400 feet. How cool would that be to see where that thing goes around the world on just a couple of milliwatts? That would be easy to do with a drone. Any other questions? Great. Okay, thank you all so much. Now, I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Christopher Vo. I met Chris first at the Nova Maker Space when I was taking my class for my Part 107 remote pilot certificate. Chris was one of the instructors. I also ran into him at Fairfax County when he was sought after by the county to, 1, demonstrate drone usage, 2, be a collaborator in how does Fairfax County evolve its policies to what is or isn't possible in the drone space. That's how I knew him. I subsequently come to learn that Chris is a renowned world authority on drones. So he's co-founder of Sentient Robotics. His specialty there is swarm drones and the synthesis of ground-based and air-based sensors and getting all of that to coordinate for exploits in military and commercial spaces and governmental work. So Chris is also an FAA certified remote pilot, community leader, educator. If you want to see something interesting, that Chris is not a newbie to this, despite his incredibly youthful looks. If you Google him on YouTube, he comes up in 2013 on a PBS NewsHour special. He's been featured in the Smithsonian, so we're thrilled to have him. So save all your questions for Chris, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Christopher Vo. I'm the president of the DC Area Drone User Group and the vice president of the National Drone User Group Network. So just to tell the story about that, the DC Area Drone User Group is an organization for amateur and professional drone users. We're a relatively new organization, about 5 years old, so we don't quite yet have the legacy of mentorship that you guys have, but we're working towards that. We seek to promote the responsible use of flying drones and robots for community service, entrepreneurial efforts, recreational purposes, and we welcome all experience levels. And we usually just try to get together and share some of our experiences and learn how to fly drones and educate ourselves on how to build them and use them in a safe and respectful manner. So it's kind of interesting that the DC Area Drone User Group was the first drone user group in the Drone User Group Network, even though we live in a no-fly zone. It's very difficult to find a place to fly around here. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. So Don actually gave me a list of questions that I can kind of address about this. So one of the questions was, is it legal to fly a drone over a tree in your yard or your neighbor's yard to help rig a radio antenna? Well, there's a few things that you have to consider. The short answer is yes, but there's kind of a long answer as well.
Stop right there. Doctor said yes.
Well, let's stand up in court.
Will he stand up in court?
Maybe an F-16 coming in.
So the first thing you have to consider is federal regulations. So Title 14 in the Code of Federal Regulations is the set of regulations for the FAA. Okay, that includes all aviation, general aviation, all that stuff. In there, in about late 2016, FAA came out with Part 107. And Part 107 is the set of regulations that apply to all uses of drones. Okay, there is a carve-out in in Part 107 for hobbyists. And there's these kind of 5 criteria for what it means to be a hobbyist. First of all, you have to be using it strictly for hobby or recreational use. The second is that it's operated in accordance with a community-based organization's set of rules. Now, a community-based organization, there's one called the AMA that's been around for about 80 years. They, historically have been involved with a lot of model aircraft operations and things like that, but they're strictly a recreational group. And my organization, the DC Area Drone User Group and the Drone User Group Network, is trying to also become a CBO recognized for the same manner. The third requirement is that the drone is not more than 55 pounds. Okay, actually that's the definition of drone by the FAA, is an aircraft that is not more than 55 pounds and is not manned. And the fourth requirement is that the aircraft is operated in a manner that does not interfere with manned aircraft, so don't fly it into manned aircraft. And the fifth requirement is that if you're within 5 miles of an airport, that you notify the airport operator. Strangely enough, they don't tell you how to do that. And You don't just call up the airport and say, "Hey, can I fly next?" I mean, if you get your Part 107 certificate, you will learn that contacting the airport is not as easy as that sometimes. But I would say if you wanted to contact the airport, make sure that you have some kind of record that you have attempted to contact the airport, because there's been a couple of cases, especially in the DC area, like near Dulles Airport, where people have gotten in trouble. Anyway, Part 107 regulations, if you're not a hobbyist, if you don't fall under that category, requires that if you want to operate a drone, you have to have a license, a Part 107 drone license. It's an exam that you have to take that costs, I think, $150. You go to the airport or local FAA-approved testing center and just take a test. The test includes things like airspace, all the different classes of airspace, and how to read weather. When they announce the weather reports, they have this formatting called METARs that is kind of a code. And you have to learn how to decode that and understand weather. There's operating requirements as well, like how high you can fly, how fast you can fly, things like that. And there's a few other things. So the first thing is that you have to know which regulation your flight falls under, whether it's hobbyist regulation or Part 107. If you are Part 107, you have to follow all those regulations. And actually, there is a regulation regarding dropping objects from a drone. Part 107 91.15 literally addresses dropping objects. And it says, and this is all it says, no pilot in command of a civil aircraft may allow any object to be dropped from an aircraft in flight that creates hazard to persons or property. However, this section does not prohibit the dropping of any object if reasonable precautions are taken to avoid injury or damage to persons or property. It's funny because that's so incredibly vague, and it's basically saying, sure, you can drop objects as long as you're careful. Again, this is one of those things where you should have some sort of record that you took some sort of precautions before you tried to do this. It would be good to have some like a notepad with some equations or something. It'd be nice to have that. So basically, it's allowed to drop things from your drone as long as reasonable precautions are taken to prevent people from getting hurt. So besides federal rules and regulations, which I could talk about for hours, you also should check with your HOA, because there's a lot of people who have gotten in trouble with their HOA and got kicked out of their communities and things like that because they were flying a drone and their neighbors complained.
You had HOA interactions with your antennas.
No, you didn't want to have any interaction. Yeah.
So Don asked the audience whether anybody has had interactions with their HOAs about the radios. Yeah, this it's also, drones. Drone people have that issue as well. Another thing is don't harass people with a drone, because there is a Virginia law that says it's illegal to intentionally fly a drone close to people to harass or intimidate them. Now, I'm pretty sure none of you fall under that category, and will do anything like that, but there is a law against that. An interesting thing to note is that political subdivisions, counties and parks, for example, in Virginia, are not permitted to regulate drone use. It's in the Virginia Code of Regulations that they cannot regulate drone use. It's interesting to note that Virginia is one of those. But if you go to another state, you should probably do some Googling and figure out whether there's any rules that pertain to your operation, because there are different rules in different states for flying drones. So where is it legal to fly a drone? If you fall under Part 101, that carve out for recreational operators, then the rules are pretty simple. don't fly within the DC freeze, FRZ, which is the flight restricted zone. The DC freeze is approximately a radius of 15 miles from Reagan National Airport. That's a pretty big area. That's that almost goes all the way up to just right outside of Baltimore. It's a pretty big area. Do not fly in a national park. So unfortunately, even though the national parks have beautiful places to take photos with your drone, don't fly in a national park. If you're flying within 5 miles of an airport, you're supposed to notify the airport. Again, it's not, it's kind of vague what that actually means, but, and it's not as easy as it might seem to get a hold of an airport operator, but this is something that you have to do according to the regulations. And you must follow community-based organization rules. So join a club like an AMA club, or the DC Area Drone User Group, and kind of learn what the rules are for that organization's operations. If you fall under the category of any other operation, that is, you fall under FAA Part 107 rules, then you have to have your license, of course, and you have to follow all these rules. For example, you're allowed to fly in uncontrolled airspace, like Class G, without any air traffic control permission. But if you're in Class B, C, D, and E airspaces, B, C, and D airspaces are usually airspaces around airports, and then E is pretty much everywhere else that's not uncontrolled airspace, then you have to get ATC permission. Don't fly over people who are not involved in the operation. Don't fly in the DC freeze, just like with our recreational operators, and don't fly in national parks. So the other question is, what radio spectrum supports drone operation? Well, I can tell you what the most common frequencies that are used are. One of the most common frequencies is 902 megahertz to 928 megahertz. That's often used for radio control and telemetry. And then, of course, the Wi-Fi frequencies like 2400 to 2500 megahertz, 2.4 band. Usually those are spread spectrum radios that are used for on off-the-shelf drones like DJI Mavics and Parrot Bebop, the kind of drones that you can buy from Best Buy that have video cameras on them and connect to your phones. Most of those are sped spectrum radios, and they're Wi-Fi based, and so usually they are also FCC Part 15 certified as well, and they also don't really usually need a license to operate. 5.8 band, 5.8 gigahertz band, 5725 to 5825 megahertz is popularly used for FPV racing, so that the camera that he was passing around that has the 5.8 radio is typically popularly used for the FPV analog NTSC or PAL video feeds. Something that's interesting to note, though, that most people don't realize is that you must have a ham radio license, or at least technician class, to legally fly analog FPV. This has been verified by the legal department at the ARRL and confirmed by the FCC. Basically, what's happened here is if you look at the regulation, you can see that there's an operating limit of 1 watt for spread spectrum 5.8 gigahertz. But analog FPV, analog video, is not spread spectrum. It falls under a different category where there's a much, much lower limit. And most of the radios, in fact, all the radios that you can find on the market that do analog FPV video, like that one right there, outputs a higher power than that. Almost, that one probably outputs 14 or 15 times the power output of that is allowed by the regulation. And most people don't realize that. So even though that radio actually does have an FCC sticker on it, right, and a Part 15 sticker on it, most people don't realize that you still have to have a license to operate that radio. The question was, is that the EIRP? So the way they specify it in the regulation is it's 1 watt EIRP, right, for spread spectrum, And then if you are not spread spectrum, then it's specified in terms of microvolts at 3 meters or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I ran the numbers at some point like years ago, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. So all these radios are way over the limit. So that's something that's important to help educate operators on, is that most drone pilots don't realize that the radio they bought from China, or even the radios they buy in the US that are analog FPV radios, they're way over the limit.
Radio transmitters are type accepted 15 or?
So the question was, are all the other radios type 15 certified? And the answer is a lot of them are type 15 certified, but the type 15 certification does not necessarily mean that the power limits are within the acceptable range for an unlicensed operator. So a lot of people don't realize that they still have to have a license to operate it.
Are those devices usually sold as commercial rather than hobby?
So the question is, are those devices sold as commercial rather than hobby? And there's no distinction at the moment between those things. A lot of what's happening in the commercial market is a lot of the hobby equipment has become part of what's used in the commercial space as well. So
I would expect the hobby equipment to be more restrictive than the commercial, because for commercial you have to have your own license and it has to be type accepted, right? Because you're not licensed to modify the radio.
So the question is related. So can you say that again?
The hobbyist radios that do not require a license. The hobby. The hobbyist radios in this equipment that are designed for unlicensed use, presumably are much more restrictive in their design than the commercial, which are higher power, I presume, and require a license to operate for commercial use, right?
So while it's true that there are commercial radios that have much higher output power and are not sold to hobbyists, hobbyists can still go and buy those things. And the sellers usually don't ask for your license or anything like that. Many of them don't. And it's only recently that a few of the vendors that sell these radios are starting to ask questions like that. But usually you can just go online, go to eBay or banggood.com or something like that, and buy a Chinese-made radio that nobody will ask you any questions. Outputs 4 watts at 5.8 gigahertz, and it's so easy to do that.
That kind of power would require a battery that you wouldn't want on a drone, right?
Well, a lot of the drones have 14 volt batteries that can easily power that. Yeah, it's totally possible to get those kind of radios. Yes.
The old-fashioned radio-controlled aircraft fit into this scheme.
So old-fashioned radio control aircraft also use similar frequencies. In fact, some of them use kind of lower frequencies as well in the VHF frequencies. But they all fall, in terms of regulations, they all fall under the same set of regulations. If it's an aircraft that weighs less than 55 pounds, they fall under the same FAA regulations. And as far as radios and things like that, they fall under the same regulations that anybody using operating a radio has to follow. The flight restrictions? The question is, are the flight restrictions the same? And yes, they are. Yeah. Yes?
Very interesting subject, but who's actually how is the purchase of the equipment and the use of the equipment being enforced?
So the question. So the question is, who the heck is enforcing all these regulations about the radio uses on drones? And I have to say, well, the FCC should be, and they have been, and it's becoming more and more of a problem because, of course, nobody's regulating the purchase of these things, right? Nobody's on there, finding people who are selling these transmitters and trying to pursue legal action against them. There is one case that I know of. There's a website called hobbyking.com, which is one of the most popular places to get drone supplies and equipment, RC supplies and equipment. They have been recently been given a cease and desist for selling over 1 watt FPV transmitters from a certain brand. I don't remember all the details of that case, but
It is in QST.
yeah. So in the audience, someone said it is in QST.
A month or two back.
Thank you.
So the other question was, does having an amateur radio license allow the use of outside normal drone bands and frequencies and higher power levels? And I have to say that hams have been doing telemetry and FPV for decades. So I don't think I need to tell you that, of course it does allow you to do more. You need to have a ham license. Like I said before, you have to have a ham license for those non-spread spectrum radio transmissions for analog FPV. There just isn't any analog FPV drone video transmitters that adhere to the limits for unlicensed transmissions. So you have to have a ham license for that.
Can we take one more question here, and then we're going to have some fun and fly some drones?
One more question? Okay, one thing I want to say, first of all, thank you so much, Chris. Dr. Vo, you're in very good company here. This ham radio club has a higher percentage of PhDs than any other amateur radio club in the nation. I don't know that that's true. I can make it up. It sounds good. I only want to make one point. The radio community pursuit the age tends to skew up a little bit, right? The drone community tends to skew the other way. I haven't thought this through yet, but I think there's a connection between these two ecosystems. If we want to get more people into amateur radio, because we know that's good, we understand demographics, we need to get more young kids in here. I bet there's some way we could find and mine that population of drone operators and get them over into here. All right, good. So now we're gonna have some fun. You have two opportunities to have some fun. One is Chris has kindly brought a variety of drones that you can play with. He'll instruct you, he'll empower you. You're gonna have some fun with his gear. At the same time, Don is going to try the ill-advised and highly unlikely to succeed attempt to fly and drop a monofilament from there to here, or from here to there. Thanks. Well, that's actually what gave me the thought to do this, is we spent so much time pumping and shooting and finding. I thought, what if I could fly up and drop? Now, as far as the legal question goes, here's my approach to that. If I'm fast and discreet and safe, I'm comfortable. Chris is going to set up some of his toys here, and Don's going to get his stuff ready. I have Joe Sable is going to hold the. Yeah, he's a ship. He's looking the slingshot shoot down there.
Just in case it goes wild.
Oh, by the way, I'd like to show you another antenna that's interesting. I only noticed today that the antennas on this are located in pretty interesting locations. If you look kind of at the corners, at the ends of these legs, there's these printed circuit boards that, if you look closely, you can see the antenna pattern on them. These are MIMO 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz antennas. And I have successfully flown this drone more than 2 kilometers. Now, in the US, you're not really supposed to fly beyond visual line of sight. That's according to the FAA regulations. No, but I was flying on a military range where it's a controlled airspace. So I'm allowed to do things there that you're not really supposed to do in FAA airspace. So, but anyway, I'll pass this around. It doesn't have any batteries on it, so I'm not going to fly this today. But this actually has a 4K video camera on it. It sends HD video for several kilometers on these little tiny PCB antennas. So if you'd like to pass it around.
You can do with that, but are you aware of any?
I am not aware of the specifics of how that particular drone sends out video, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were beamforming and other things like that. It actually, all it says is 2.4, 5.8, and MIMO. Yes?
Can you explain a little bit about drone swarms? Some of us saw it on the Olympics, but we have no idea how you get them all working together and going in the same
network
direction.
or what?
Yeah, so the question is, can you explain a little bit more about drone swarms? So a swarm, as defined, usually means a bunch of drone aircraft that are intercommunicating. They're communicating between each other in order to coordinate. Now, I don't do a lot right now with swarms in particular. I do fleets of drones. But typically, if you've watched the Olympics, there was a drone light show in the Olympics that was run by Intel. And the way that typically works for Intel, for example, is they preload all of the flight paths onto the vehicles on the ground. So they don't have to send all that stuff up to the aircraft while they're in flight. And then they send broadcast commands to the drones via probably a 900 megahertz radio or 433, whatever is the lowest frequency that they can usually get away with in the area that they're operating. And I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it's 900 megahertz. And they're probably just using broadcast communications to do that. I would expect that the drones might be sending telemetry back as well, but usually over a TDMA instead of, so usually with Wi-Fi you're using CSMA, but with their radios are probably using a TDMA radio where they have time slots and each are they're using that for media access control.
For the purposes of time, we need to get going, so we're going to move on to drone flying.
Sorry, one more thing we have to say. If any of you want to learn more about flying a drone, I want you to join the DC Area Drone Users Group. Just look them up on the web. You'll find them. You got questions? This guy's the expert. But join that DC Users Group for drones. They're wonderful. Thank you. In harm's way. I'm officially declaring this my flight corridor right here over Yasik's head. We're going to take off from here, fly over there, drop, and then hopefully declare victory. We may crash and burn, which is more likely. So far, my success rate is 1 success out of 3 tries. Full disclosure.
First of all,
here's the weight picked up to the monofilament.
they understand.
This has never been tried before.
Now try this at home. These are trained professionals.
I think I'm going to wet myself before we All right, let's see what happens. We have now crossed the giant street. We are now on the other side of the street. The question is, can we let it go?
On the way. All right! You're in charge of the field day antenna team.
We get that all very much. There it is.
I'm cranking.
I got it. Just drop it, yeah.
I don't know if that's an insult.
Okay, everybody, you just witnessed a world first. The first time in this cafeteria that we put an antenna line over the tables. Thanks to all of those people that helped. What a job. Okay. Okay, I was just advised that there's going to be a D-Star DMR demo in the back, hosted by none other than KM4HRR. In the meantime, I want to say thank you again to Rebecca, KM4RDS, for the food. And I want to invite everybody to help clean up. We need to leave this place cleaner than we found it, please. We need to leave it cleaner than we found it so we can continue to enjoy the Fairfax County Public Schools. Our next meeting is February, the second Saturday in February. Watch out, there's a drone over your head.